check into that, whether you're up. Okay.
It's a good funny question.
Jason. Yeah, do you have a copy? I don't think it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. That's what I'm They change it, then it changes.
You still have that other?
Do they? Still trying to get taken care of.
Put that away, don't embarrass us.
Jesus Christ, you wouldn't. I can make the ordinance. Here's the ordinance. Already put it.
Ready, Carl?
Sir,
Ready?
sorry.
Ready?
Yes.
I want to call the Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting to order for August the 22nd, 2018. Will everyone please stand for a salute to the flag?
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Notice of this meeting has been advertised in accordance with Chapter 231 PL 1975 by advertising in the Home News Tribune, notifying the Sentinel Publishing Company and the Star Ledger, posting on the bulletin board and filing with the Borough Clerk. Roll call.
Mr. Green?
Here.
Mr. Henry?
Here.
Mr. Kaczynski?
Here.
Mr. Emma?
Here.
Mr. Savili?
Here.
Mr. Esposito?
Here.
Mr. Foley? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Foley's not here. Mr. Kem?
Here.
Mr. Barry?
Here.
Mr. Cornell?
Okay, we ready for the first one? Okay. Okay, the first applicant tonight is case number 18-12, Vanessa, and I hope I can pronounce your last name correctly, Jackessen. Would you please come forward?
Step up in front of the microphone there. Just need to swear you in real quickly. You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And give us your name, spell your last name. Is it Jackie Sue? Okay, Ms. Jackie Sue, we have your application. Just in your own words, tell the board what you're here and what you want.
Okay.
So you're going to build that on the back of the house. You're going to enclose the existing deck. And according to the plans, it's 11 by 24-foot deck, right? And that would be the only work you were going to do? Okay.
That's
And-
going to be screened in?
That's all right, let's just clarify these things.
Board have any questions?
And just to clarify for the board, the reason the applicant's here, they're in the R10 zone, and because they're putting the roof and enclosing it, it becomes part of the structure as opposed to the deck that exists. So the zone allows a maximum building lot coverage of 20%. Once the deck is enclosed and considered as part of the building, it goes to 23%. But in essence, they're not creating any new impervious, it's pretty much been there, just open deck.
Any questions?
And Mr. Chairman, we asked this of all the applicants, so will there be any heat or water in this? Okay, just for the record. And your house is going to remain a single-family house? Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I want to open this application up to the public. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak in regards to this application?
I move the public portion be closed.
Second.
Public portion is closed. What is the pleasure of the board in
Make a motion
reference
we
to this
approve.
application?
Make a motion, we approve the application?
Roll call.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski?
Yes.
Mr. Emma? Yes. Mr. Esposito?
Yes.
Mr. Civilli?
And board members, due to the unfortunate situation with your husband, and we do send our best to you, I was asked to prepare a resolution to approve the application as it was relatively straightforward. And that way, Ms. Jackson can pull her building permits and begin construction versus having to wait till next month when we normally adopt a written resolution. So that was emailed to everybody. Explains the application as usual, grants the relief as requested with the detail and conditions that are normally in our resolutions of this type for a homeowner. So if the resolution meets with the board approval, we could follow the usual procedure of having someone offer the resolution and vote on it and adopt it this evening. Sure thing. Sure.
I therefore make a resolution to adopt this application,
It's a motion to adopt the written resolution.
written resolution.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Mr. Kaczynski?
Yes.
Mr. Emma?
Yes.
Mr. Civilli?
Yes.
Mr. Esposito?
Yes.
Okay, ma'am, the application's been approved and memorialized, so tomorrow you can actually go down to the zoning office and she'll give you the necessary paperwork to get started right away. Okay.
You're welcome. Best to you and your family.
Bye-bye.
Any way to waive any fees for her or anything? Do any waive any fees in these certain circumstances for her? Like that or no? You don't do stuff like that?
I don't know.
Can't do this?
Has everyone had the opportunity to review the minutes of July 25th, 2018? What's the pleasure of the board concerning the minutes of July 25th, 2018?
I move that they be approved.
Second.
Okay, minutes have been approved.
So the last item we have to discuss this evening is our planner, Mr. Barry, had prepared the annual report for not just 2017, but 2016. And as I mentioned last meeting, we circulated that, and John's here tonight to run through the report and talk to you about that. I had sent, just so everyone had an idea what the form would look like, the resolution that we would send, we would adopt and then send to the mayor and council as well as the planning board with a copy of the report and any recommendations the board may decide on. Tonight, there's no rush to adopt it. We'll, adopt it next month's meeting. We'll list it on the agenda. But I'll let John run through his report and we can have further discussion.
Sure. So the annual report, which in this case is a 2-year report, is something that the zoning board is supposed to do every year, just to review the action that was taken and then make recommendations if there's anything. If you see the same kinds of applications over and over again, maybe it's an indication that something in the ordinance should be tweaked, and the board has the opportunity in the report to make a recommendation to the planning board and the council to take a look at some of those items. So the report summarizes the activity from 2016, breaks it down by zone and by type of application, and the activity from 2017, same way. So the bulk variances, it doesn't seem like there's an inordinate number of bulk variances for a town of Sayreville's size. There's, we don't have constant stream of bulk variances. The one type that stood out a little bit is that we seem to see a large number of variances pertaining to accessory structures, whether they're detached garages for people who have extra cars or storing classic cars or working on cars. That seemed to be a trend last year, although I don't think we've had any this year. So just could be a little blip on the radar. The most important, largest applications, obviously, are the use variance applications, and we had 3 D1 use variance applications in 2017, and those were the office and hardware store, Fisher Street Associates, in the R7 zone, residential zone, so the office and hardware zone and the residential zone. We had a 3-family unit in the single-family residential zone at 9 Crum Street, and then a wireless communication facility in the B1, and then one expansion of a non-conforming use, Clyde's Auto Recycling Facility, and then the conditional use variance for the 967 Route 9 Wawa, which then ended up carrying over into this year. So that application was originally decided in 2017, but then ended up back before us because of the court challenge. So with those, there's no real pattern to them. We're not seeing anything that really indicates a trend. It was really 5 totally different types of applications and spread out around town and in different zones. So no overriding trend with those. So the report has a couple simple recommendations, just general things, and if there's anything else that the board sees that's a concern with the types of applications we've been reviewing, if you think that there's some of the applications maybe aren't things that necessarily should be coming to the board, and a tweak to the ordinance could reduce the workload. Like I said, it's not an inordinate amount of applications, so I think we're in pretty good shape with the bulk standards and things in the ordinance, unless anybody has any comments.
Just for the benefit of the public who might be listening to this, what were the recommendations?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I was going to get into those. One is, and we've already adopted this at Mr. Kem's direction, is to eliminate the practice of conducting informal reviews at the zoning board. The zoning board doesn't have the authority to do so, so I know that had been the board's practice in the past, but we just recommend, in order to keep everything above board, just to eliminate that practice. And then there is a provision in the municipal land use law that allows for an appeal of the zoning board's decision of an approval. That allows somebody to appeal that decision to the governing body, and that's an optional provision in the land use law that happens to be permitted by the town's ordinance, and we tend to recommend that not be allowed. We don't really like the practice of somebody being able to run to the town council to appeal your decision. Rather handle it in the courts as any other application at the planning board would be handled if there needs to be an appeal for some reason. So that, we recommend that that section of the ordinance be tweaked to eliminate that opportunity. And then the other recommendation is to review the board's bylaws, which is just kind of the board's rules of order, general practices of how board members are elected as the chairman, vice chairman, and so forth, and start times, any kind of curfew, just general, the practices of the board. Not to make any specific changes, just to have a look at them and see, just so that everybody on the board is familiar with them. If anybody on the board has any recommendations for any tweaks to those, because it's been some time since those were last updated. Mr. Cornell indicated that 1992, I think, was when those were adopted. So it may just be worth a look to see if there's any changes to general practice that might be worth exploring. So that's,
Okay, where are they?
I had that conversation with Carl when he first asked me. I said, I don't think that they've been handed out to the board for years. They were adopted in 1992. And I think initially board members received copies of them, but over the years, I don't know that any board member sitting here has actually seen them. So that's maybe the first thing, is to hand those out and let you take a look at them.
So that's a good idea. So that is more of an internal, getting to the purpose of John's report and the action that the zoning board would take on it. The bylaws is separate. He's noted in his report, which is the right thing to do. That wouldn't be something we would send to the mayor and council. We would review the bylaws ourselves. We need to change them. We change our own bylaws, that it doesn't have to go through mayor and council or the planning board. But picking up on Jay's thought is, he has provided them to me. I will circulate them to everybody, and Jay and John as well. Take a look at them. We'll all take a look at them, and we can always talk about that at another meeting to see if there's any changes there that need to be made. Sometimes, as Jay indicated, they've been sitting since '92. No one's touched them. May have changed just procedures. I mean, sometimes they address, can the chairman make a motion to approve an application or not, which is an archaic rule. It used to be that the chairman never made a motion. He just seconded a motion or called for a roll on it, which seemed to be, an issue that was done a lot in the past, and that's gone by the wayside. Most boards of any kind, zoning board, planning board, corporate boards, the chairmans can make a motion on an application or on any piece of business. So there's things like that that are kind of seem like mundane, but we might want to take a look at those and then clean them up just so everything's updated and we've all taken a look at them. So again, we'll circulate it. Myself, John, and Jay will take a look if we have recommendations based upon our experience here in Sayreville and other boards we represent. We'll certainly present those to you for consideration, and we can decide where we go from there.
You have them?
Yeah, Jay provided them to me. Yeah.
How many pages are they?
Jay, what is it, like 15 pages or
It's
so?
like 26.
Oh, 26.
26 pages.
Yeah, and some of them are kind of, you read it and they're self-evident. It says, this is a zoning board. We're a zoning board. Here's the statute that says we're a zoning board. So, I mean, you need to have those in there to put them in context. So it's not 26 pages of procedures and issues you have to really wade through. There's a lot of pages you'll breeze through. And some things are obvious and, we don't need to change. But again, it's good to put a set of eyes on them. I have some boards that something we might consider is every year at the reorganization meeting in January, when we reelect our chairman and vice chair and secretary, appoint the professionals, they just have a resolution that goes on to reapprove the bylaws each year. So every year, everyone gets them in their reorganization package and takes a look at them. So something else we might want to consider putting into practice, just make that a normal resolution on the reorg agenda so we remind ourselves to look at them.
Can that affect if someone is suing the board, whether you followed the bylaws or not, or?
No, I mean, the bylaws, the other issue is the bylaws aren't really supposed to address anything of substance that would affect an applicant. Some towns have some substantial issues in there that I think go over the line. Like I said, it's really internal, policies and procedures. Again, when, how we elect the chairman every year, some boards have detail on how the voting takes place for the chairman and a separate voting procedure for the vice chairman and things of that nature, which really just internal operations and doesn't affect, if they're followed or not, it doesn't affect an applicant or give an applicant a right to have any claim against the board in appealing a decision that we didn't follow our bylaws. So that's the other thing too, is we want to look for those issues, that we're not creating substantive issues that could affect an application in our bylaws. To make sure we stand on all four square on that.
2 questions.
Sure thing.
Does this report encompass any application that came before us, even if they pulled the application?
There's, and I don't, do you have, I don't know which version you have here.
You know what, I just grabbed one that's been sitting on my desk, so you may have revised
So
it.
the,
Don't
I
wanna
will
use
make sure
mine.
that, yeah, prior to any kind of action on it, I'll make sure that this is the most up-to-date version is sent around to the board. There's a few notes in it about some applications that were withdrawn. So the tables are meant to show the applications that were decided, where the action was taken, and then there's a note in a couple instances that there were 2 applications that were filed that were never proceeded or started and then withdrew. So it's meant to cover.
Okay, yeah, because I saw the last one on page 2, is like 2 sign applications, and I think we had 2, and then they pulled one, and we just did the Route 35 one.
Oh, you're referring to the billboards?
Yeah.
So we had one that was heard before the board and approved on 35 at the Phoenix Trucks, the truck
And the
place.
Route 9 one.
And then the other one
Route 9.
was on Route 9, yeah. Was that formally withdrawn at this point?
No, it's still,
it's-
my recommendation is still pending.
But that, this report doesn't cover the activity for this year. Yeah, so those things would be reflected in next year's report, and if we still if that sign application was still, the billboard application was still lingering, then that would be reflected. The sign applications that are referenced in here are bulk variances where, a sign on a building is bigger than permitted. The billboards were use variance applications, so they would have been mentioned in a little more detail.
Okay, the second thing, now, do we use this time to make recommendations as far as like, just as an example, we had the issue with the temple, size, traffic issues, I mean, can we adjust the code?
So that would be actually when we review the 2018 report in the beginning of 2019, because what it is, again, we're a little late in the year, but John had to catch up and do 2 years in one. We had some bigger applications, so we were not in a rush to handle.
All right, so this is just
This is 2016 and
2017.
But in 2018, we'll discuss those and we can make recommendations. But also getting to your first question, the very narrow mandate of the law is we report on decisions on applications we made. So if an application was like, say, started in 2017, and carried to 2018, we didn't decide it, we wouldn't really be making a decision on it. But John, to be inclusive, reported on applications that came and were withdrawn. But really, the recommendations are ones we made decisions on. So we haven't made a decision yet, we can't make a recommendation on it.
Okay.
So that's it. The other thing too is, and this is certainly not meant as any criticism, because I have great respect for John. His report is very encompassing and does a very good job at digesting the variances in different ways by types of variances, zones they're in, things of that nature. And having talked with John, he anticipates what you may look for, what his experience with other boards. If there's any information that's not presented here or digested, you might think is helpful to you, now's the time to give John and us input, so next year we can either change this report, or next year he can say, all right, I'll create a separate chart to address whatever issue it may be. Because again, it's your report at the end of the day, and we're here as professionals to support the board. So even if you don't want to change this one, if you think of something afterwards for the 2018 report, share it with John. So that way we can give the board what it needs to analyze the applications.
I'm sorry if I missed it before, so we're not doing this every 2 years, you're just catching up. We're gonna be doing it
Right.
every year.
Right.
So it was never done in 2017 for 2016.
Okay.
So this is kind of catching up,
Yeah.
covering the backlog. Ideally, it would probably be done in the first quarter of the year to handle, and anticipating next year, that would be the goal, is to, but sometimes, in this case, this year, we had significant applications going on for the first 5 or so months of the year that kind of took the board's attention. They didn't have time to devote to this. So now that we have a little time, it's better to.
Just curious, what happens if we didn't do this?
There's no penalty, it's just something that's supposed to be done by the board. I mean, the council could send us a nasty letter saying we haven't seen your report, you guys have to do your report, and that's your job as board members. I think that's the extent of it. There's nothing like you're gonna get a ticket in the mail or something.
Yeah, it doesn't delegitimize the board.
Yeah, it doesn't, right, it's not like a master plan review or something like that. So
Right.
it's, again, it's like a best management practices type of thing, you know, every organizations tend to look back, you know, end of year when they do taxes, things like that. Hey, what happened last year? What do we do next year? Forecasting, things of that nature. It's meant to be in that vein, is this kind of self-critical analysis and forward thinking at the same time.
And because the ordinance is the council's business, but it gets referred to the planning board for a review, the zoning board doesn't, this is the zoning board's opportunity to kind of chime in on ordinance-related matters that may come up. So it's a formal venue for you folks to enter any kind of recommendations that you may have.
John, I think you covered it, but the garages, very small size garages that are allowed, can you make a point of those?
So the garages, and that I saw that there was activity with a lot of accessory structures that were oversized or had setback issues. And it looked like a lot of the applications were related to detached garages, where the limit on an accessory structure isn't,
150 square feet.
right, isn't adequate for a
Just,
detached garage.
I can just give some.
It's almost impossible, right?
Well,
Right.
I can give you a little bit of background on that. Years ago, there was a problem in town where residents were building garages without having to come before a board, and you didn't have height restrictions either. So you could build a big garage with a second story, and they were running businesses out of second stories, and the borough had problems going through and trying to stop that from happening. So what happened was, you put a height restriction on, so if you'll see a lot of times 15 foot is the height for an accessory structure. That's where it came from, so you really can't have a second story. And also, if somebody wants to put a garage, you rarely see anything that's 150 square feet. It's always larger than that. That 10 by 15 is not the size of a garage. So that's why everybody that wants to build a garage was forced to come before this board to try to prevent those type of problems that you had in the past. Now, whether that, because of your height restrictions, if you want to maybe increase the size of a permitted garage to allow residents to build maybe a single-car garage without having to come before the board, this is the time to go through and make that type of recommendation.
What is it, what's the square footage on a typical garage?
Your typical parking place is 9 by 18, so maybe 10 by 20 that's even a small garage, because people may want to store some lawnmowers and have a little workbench in there, so.
Could you make some contingency, say you change that, but it has to match the existing structure, as long as these things are met, you don't have to come before the board, can you do that?
See, I think this board would make recommendations. The planning board would eventually look at that and make a recommendation to the mayor and council that the ordinance be changed to allow that. But I just wanted to give you some background as to where that 150-foot came from and where the height came from. Because of past problems, the ordinance was changed to basically require anybody that wants to put a garage to come before you. So then you have an opportunity to ask them, are you gonna have water, are you gonna have sewer, are you gonna run a business out of the garage? And most of the time in your resolution, you'll have those as conditions, that you can't run a business. That way, you have some enforcement teeth. If somebody is running a business, you can go back and refer to the resolution.
So our recommendations don't go right to the council, our recommendations go to planning board first?
Both.
Oh, to both.
Simultaneously, so when we adopt the resolution, attaching the report and adopting the report, and then recommendations or no recommendations, the resolution and the report will get sent to the mayor and council and simultaneously to the planning board.
So the planning board really has no authority to,
The reason the planning board gets it is for consideration. So there's actually more than one way to do it. So let's start with like the general way it's normally done. So if they're going to propose, the council's going to propose a change in the zoning ordinance, let's say for the accessory structure for a garage, you can make it whatever, 10 by 20. So they would propose the ordinance, and then under the municipal land use law, they have to refer it to the planning board to review it. And the planning board reviews it for a number of issues. One is to look at the master plan, which is an overall guiding conceptual, more or less, document of how we want the town to be built out. They look at that to say, does this go against the master plan, yes or no? If it does, sometimes we'll say, you know what, the master plan didn't anticipate this, so we're okay with the ordinance. And they also will make recommendations based upon their experience from applications before them to the council as well, saying, hey, you know what, we've kind of seen the same thing on applications that are under their jurisdiction, and we think that's a good idea, we recommend it. Or maybe a condition, they say, you know what, add this little condition on to make sure we don't have problems with people putting a second story or turning it into a business or a bedroom or something. And they refer that back to the council, and the council considers that before they adopt the ordinance.
It sounds like this is consensus. It could go like ping pong back and forth a couple times before they settle on something.
I mean, they could normally, again, it can, right? But generally, the council considers the report from the planning board, either, you know, agrees with it and makes changes. Sometimes the planning board just comes back and says, yeah, we have no problem with this, go ahead as is. And then they go ahead and they do it. Sometimes they'll make a recommendation, the council can either decide to follow it, ignore it, or change it, or doing something similar. So the end result, the council makes the final decision. They get input from the planning board. Some things that are bigger and have wider implications, they may have a back and forth, as you were indicating. But generally, you know, those are all discussed at the planning board, because the planning board, unlike the zoning board, has the mayor is a member of the board, or you can have a designee if the mayor doesn't sit. And there's a council representative who sits on the planning board. So there's kind of an integration between what the council does and the planning board does, especially when it comes to ordinances. And that's the way the law set it up that way. So there is a little bit of not just continuity, but those two positions will provide insight. So when the ordinance comes to the board, the mayor or his designee or the council person who sits on the board will say, hey, here's why we're sending you guys this ordinance, give you some background, some history, our thoughts on it. And if someone on the board says, hey, well, you know, we don't like this, or we think this changed, then they say, oh, we consider that. And it'll put context and provides for a better discussion and hopefully a better ordinance at the end of the day. And a little long-winded, but that's what the process was envisioned, to try and have a more organic and integrated process versus everyone just operating in their lane and not coordinating.
Let me ask this. We send our recommendations to the mayor and council and to the planning board. When the planning board sends their report and their recommendations, is it also sent to us?
No, it's not. It's just between the council and the planning board. I mean, it's something it's a public record where, you know, we could get a copy of it, certainly. You know, the ordinance itself as well.
Anyone else have any questions?
Good report. Thanks. So, so any other recommendations, or we can sit on it for a month and discuss it again if anyone wants, if you want to think about it, or?
Sit on it for a month and then decide next month.
There's no real hurry, it's
Yeah.
just a.
As John indicated, there's not a hurry, so even if you guys want to have another discussion on this next month, because now we've had a little more discussion about it and purposes, and John's gone through the report and put it in context for everybody, we can certainly discuss it again next month and adopt the resolution the month after that. Nothing hanging over our heads at this point.
Can we discuss it next month and then adopt the resolution at the same time?
We certainly could. If we have an idea of what the board wants to do, again, I just sent a draft resolution where we have to fill in the blank, either we, you know, make no recommendations, or, you know, make the following recommendations, and we'd have to frame those. Again, with concurrence of the whole board. Just take, for example, we're gonna make the recommendation for the enlargement of the garages. Do we wanna just really make it to X square feet, or do we wanna have other conditions that it's, you know, it's a garage so long as it's not attached to the house, or whatever other conditions we think should be in there? Sometimes it's easier to do discussing, and not adopt the resolution on the fly, but if we can get it worked out ahead of time, we do. But again, no rush. It's better to have it, you know, worded well and in context. And, you know, again, I know I'm using that example because it's just the easiest one before us. As Jay said, we could even put in our explanations, we understand the reason why the town had done this in the past. You know, we feel that because of the height restriction, that the square footage restriction is not as important anymore. You know, it's mitigated by the height, and that puts a control on there, and therefore we should expand the square footage but keep the height the same so that we have that control. So, you know, sometimes we put it in context for the the mayor and council and the planning board, it might help them in digesting our recommendation.
Okay.
John, just one, did you go back and look at the 2015 or 14 reports to see if there's like same things going back?
Did I look at that? I don't, you know what, I don't think I did look at those. If, Joan, do you have copies of them?
I have not a report like that. I have what I gave you.
Okay.
Various applications.
Were there any recommendations?
Oh, it's just a report, yeah.
Right.
I'm not saying recommendations, just a report, just to see if there's like,
I didn't see the ones prior to 2016.
I think the garage issue that we talked about has been ongoing for years.
yeah, so you
Right.
can say for the past X number of years.
Yeah, it certainly looked like 2016 and 2017, there was, I think there were, written in here. There were 5 in 2016 and 9 in 2017. Like, so that's a fairly good volume, but we haven't had one this year, have we? I don't think we have. So, not that it won't remain an issue or won't crop up again, but everybody got it out of their system.
My own personal view on those things would be that I would tend to keep the way it is now, so we do have a little bit more control, because a lot of these blocks and whatnot that people put them on are very tight, or, you know, I think we just want to have a little bit more control on something like that than just letting them build it if it meets the planning board's ordinances.
You'd
That's
still
my
have,
personal view.
you'd still have other restrictions, like lot coverage.
Yeah.
So somebody could go through and put a big
And
garage
buffer
on
and
a
stuff
small
like that.
lot,
Yeah.
because you kick in a variance for lot coverage. If somebody had a big lot with small coverage with the house, they could put a big garage if you make revisions. So
Right.
that's something to think about.
Yeah, because there's all the moving parts with the regulations, the setbacks, the height, the coverage, beyond just the size of the building, so. Yeah, something to think about.
Okay, so we'll discuss this at next meeting and make our recommendations on various ordinances and go from there.
Sounds good.
Any other issues coming before this board that anyone wants to discuss?
Anything new with the temple and the fees?
That is, unfortunately, we don't have any involvement in that. That is being handled by they have special counsel for the mayor and council have put in place, actually, because there's been more than one, getting a little background information for people involved, there's been more than one appeal of the escrow billings by the temple over the past couple of years. So they're going to be handling that under the municipal land use law. It first goes to the council to try and resolve it, and then if not, it goes to the Construction Board of Appeals. So I did speak with the lawyer. He called me just to get some current background information on the application. And they're preparing to address it at council, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
So their clock is ticking away?
That's the one odd thing. Usually, laws in general, they have timeframes, and, this timeframe, we have 45 days adopted into ordinance, and it's detailed. It just, as far as the council's involvement, it just says the council's, to make a reasonable effort to resolve it before it goes to the Construction Board of Appeals. So,
But their 2-year time finish is ticking away.
yes, under the ordinance, right, to build the variance and operate the variance, they have,
Right now, they can't do anything.
they can. They also have to go to other outside agencies. They need to get county approval. They need, I'm not sure everything they need, but for example, if they have to go to DEP, if they have to go to DOT, if they need which they probably do, a soil conservation permit, they need to go to all those outside agencies and get those approvals, and then come back, and with all those in hands, then get their building permits, but they still need to address the escrow issue before they do that. So they have a bit of homework to do before they're ready to pull permits.
Who is the special counsel?
Is Glenn Keynes. Glenn, I've known for as long as I've been practicing law. Glenn is a very well-known lawyer in land use. He does write one of the books on land use in New Jersey. He's very familiar with, land use law in general and this specific issue.
So he's representing the borough in reference this?
Correct.
Where is his office is located?
Yeah, they're all, geez, you know what, let me see, if I have his contact in my phone. You know, it's funny, I've been to his building because I know one of his other partners when I used to do a lot of litigation. I think it's up in that area. Is it?
Parsippany?
Yeah, it's the municipal land.
He
Yeah,
wrote it?
He's in Parsippany, that's correct,
The copy that
of the book,
Okay.
yeah,
So he's representing the borough in reference to these escrow
challenge.
challenges.
And he has, I think he has been all along, his firm has been.
Okay. Anything else? Nothing else? Okay, make a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn?
Meeting's adjourned.
Yeah, shut your mics off.
Just really, there's nothing in there.
It's a new system. There's a new control cabinet back there, right? Monday night's meeting, they were testing. Supposed to have a new